The one and only Pink Floyd, of course. The only member of the band to have played in every Pink Floyd lineup is drummer Nick Mason. Afternoon to you, Nick.
Hi.
We're here to talk to you about lots of different things. The V&A exhibition and the re-release of your autobiography or your personal memoir, as it was about all of the years together, 50 years together, extraordinary. But this mortal remains, the exhibition at the V&A, this is something that's been a long time in the making, and it is truly vast in its scale. How pleased are you that it's actually happened now?
Oh, really pleased. As you say, it's taken a long time to put together, and it's been sort of backwards and forwards as to whether it would ever get completed, I think. But to have it sort of available now and open is terrific.
You've described it as the ultimate 50th birthday present.
Well, yeah, because it's a sort of scrapbook, really. If someone had, it's a sort of This Is Your Life, only in audio-visual.
Nick, I was speaking to Victoria, the curator at the V&A, earlier on today, and of course, over 350 artefacts. But she said, as opposed to the Bowie collection, when they did the exhibition there, and it was very well organised, and Bowie's estate itself was very good at collecting lots of different parts of his history, it was a bit more difficult with Pink Floyd. So who is the biggest hoarder in the group, Nick?
Well, I think I probably am, but it's pretty random. And I did say at one point that I was a bit worried that we were going to end up with a musical car boot sale. And I think that's where the V&A stepped in and really helped organise things, because it was amazing how much stuff came out of attics and back rooms and basements and so on.
And schools.
And schools, yes.
I love the fact
I think I know where we're going here.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the cane, when I was reading about that, I thought, now that really is digging deep into the history of Pink Floyd, finding the cane that may have, administered discipline to Roger at some point in the past.
No, it definitely did. I mean, it's not only the cane, it's the punishment book that explains what he'd done wrong. Because it wasn't only Roger either, it was Storm Thorgerson, half of Hypnosis, who was at the same school, and both of them. I think Storm got punished more than Roger did.
Did that explain a lot about the relationship within the band then, when you saw that book?
No, it didn't. It just ratified what we already knew.
Do you know what it was that he was caned for?
Yeah.
What was it?
Fighting.
Well, there we are. Well, maybe that does explain something.
Ratification, if any was needed.
But amazing. So the book, the cane, and then the book as well. And then, of course, this forms part, I guess, of the wall part of the exhibition, does it?
Yes, it does. It does relate to the teacher, although Roger did make it clear that he didn't. He said, when describing the headmaster administering the cane, he said his heart really wasn't in it.
Have you got, I mean, obviously you've seen it, you've walked through it. Is there a part that particularly speaks to you that you think, my goodness, this is, this exactly exemplifies everything that we've tried to achieve in our live shows and with our artistry?
Not really. I mean, yes, I have been through it a lot, and it's interesting because there's not many surprises. Thank
For
God.
you.
Yeah. It's more the detail, really. There's a charming letter from Syd written to a girlfriend right at the beginning of the band, illustrated with a drawing of the van that we'd got at the time. Something like that's quite. That's sort of quite moving, and I think in some ways it's those details that are almost more interesting than sort of giant inflatables.
And what about the technology of the exhibition as well? Because for those people who go and visit it, they can really immerse themselves in the sound, the technology that you didn't have in the 60s and 70s at your disposal. How did that feel? Slightly envious?
Yeah, but I have to say that even now, that one's looking at things and thinking, do you know what, in 5 years' time, it's all going to move on even further, without a doubt. I mean, when we were putting this together, we were already looking at things that we couldn't actually utilise now. But I think in 5 years' time, well, hopefully maybe we might even be able to introduce them further along the line. But there's technology in terms of particularly sort of video things that we just touch on in this exhibition.
Now, I don't know how sentimental a person you are, Nick, but kind of wandering around, there a tear in your eye at any point?
Oh, we try not to cry.
We're
It's
from that
band
generation.
policy.
Oh, right.
Is it? One of the rules.
So what about memories it sparked? Because you won't be able to remember everything that went on for the last 50 years.
No, but it's always nice to be remembered of just how many different moustaches I had over the years.
One never gets tired of looking at one's moustache.
I wonder if there was a favourite era moustache that you had.
Oh, I think very early 70s, probably top.
Big moustache
Top
decade.
moustache.
Very good moustache.
I've thoroughly enjoyed reading your book, Inside Out, the paperback now, A Personal History of Pink Floyd. Am I right in thinking this came out, 2004 originally? Was it a coffee table book in its first format?
Well, it was a sort of intellectual coffee table book.
Of course.
It had lots of words as well as pictures. Yeah, it was the original version was a hardback with a lot of illustrations. And I'm hoping actually to republish that in that form as well at some point. But this has got all the pertinent facts.
Yes, and I think that's what I'm getting at is that, I mean, the photos are brilliant and they're in here, but really it's a blooming good read. So it's the words really that I'm kind of interested in. And you added on a new section to this, and that was for what purpose? What did you want to include?
Well, I think there were a lot of bits and pieces that had happened over the last 10 or 15 years, and it was sort of worthy of bringing it all up to date. I mean, I should mention that Roger's sort of puff for the book was something about Nick being a great novelist, but and I like
fiction.
But, yeah. But it's really, I think, worth mentioning. I mean, now Rick and Syd have both died. A bit more about them, perhaps.
And Storm, of course. Yeah.
And Storm, absolutely, and Steve O'Rourke, management. I think there's events such as Live 8, bringing those in as well.
In the book, you talk very candidly of the moment when the other band members decided not to pick Syd up en route to a gig in 1968. Tell us about that.
Well, it's interesting you say the other band members, as though somehow I've managed to indicate it's all their fault. And I was
You've
innocent
escaped
of all charges.
culpability. No, you were in it with them.
Yeah.
Okay. So what happened?
Well, it's absolutely right. We got in the car to head for some, I can't remember where we were meant to be playing that night. And someone said, oh, right, we've got a pig set up. And someone else went, do we have to? And someone else went, let's not. And so it sort of was a blueprint of how we generally operate, which is with as little confrontation as possible.
How do you feel about that decision now? Was it the right one?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Because Syd had really lost interest in being in the band. I mean, there's a lot of talk about whether he was an acid casualty, which I think he certainly was, but I think it was compounded by the fact that he was being pushed all the time to be in a rock band. And I think he'd actually done that and wanted to do something else. And we didn't really recognise that, which was a shame. But as far as we're concerned, when we worked without Syd, although we'd lost our lead singer, front man, guitar player, it was almost like starting a new band. And we had that same enthusiasm that had almost disappeared by then.
In the early 70s, when Roger, and you say this in the book, was talking to melody maker Nick, and he said, a feeling in the group, and certainly there's a very heavy feeling in my head that we've really let things slide horribly, and it's beginning to drive me crazy. Where do you think that came from, that slide?
I think that was sort of post-Dark Side that he said that, and I think probably the success of Dark Side, it is always difficult to follow that sort of thing. And I think people occasionally say, well, what would you change? Well, the one thing I'd have changed now, looking back, is I think after that record we should have taken longer before we went back into the studios.
You went almost straight away back into studios, didn't you?
And what would have been nicer, really, would have been to have toured with Dark Side for a year. We have no record of, visual record of the shows we did with Dark Side. Most of which were really interesting. We used quite a lot of film which we'd never done before, and new lighting technology. And we probably should have just enjoyed it and not worried too much about trying to get back and do the next thing.
But also very quickly, the lengths you would go to, and I read about Storm and the lengths he would go to. Let's think about Dark Side of the Moon cover, whereas now you'd go to Photoshop and you'd get a pyramid and you'd get that wasn't enough, was it?
Oh no, Storm's stories of shooting some of these album sleeves are fabulous, and certainly we wanted some pictures of the pyramids, so I think Poe was sent off to Egypt to go and photograph them at the dead of night, when I believe he was not meant to be there at all and was having to dodge security guards in order to get these moonlit pictures.
And you had to wait for a full moon, of course, as well.
Yeah, there's always something that isn't quite right.
That is the record industry of old.
You're listening to a BBC 5 Live podcast.
If you like this, you might also like this.
The 5 Live Consumer Team, featuring Martin Lewis.
Does it have to be this complicated?
Sometimes I make it more complicated because I want to dot all the I's and T's.
To find out more about our range of podcasts, click, tap or swipe bbc.co.uk/5live.
We talked about the phenomenal success of Dark Side of the Moon only briefly. I mean, is it still the longest charting album in history?
I don't actually know.
I think it probably is.
maybe.
It was for a long time.
We were sort of battling it out with The Sound of Music, as far as I remember.
Yeah, and
But
1 in
all
7
of
that
that-
owns 3 copies.
All of that success, did that make for strained relationships to a certain extent?
No, I don't think so. I don't think that did. I think you just end up with situations where you have people who have slightly different musical aspirations, and at the beginning of a band, everyone's singing from the same sheet. But as time goes by, people start drifting into wanting to explore other areas, and it's one of the penalties of success that you achieve a certain amount and then people want to go on and do something else, and that may not be exactly the same.
Was it a democracy and then stopped being one, or was it never really a democracy?
Oh, good question. And I think it was never a true democracy, because the tendency was to let the major, whoever was doing most of the writing, have more control. But I think over a period of time, certainly initially Syd was band leader, and I think after that Roger was, and more recently David. So it's my turn next.
That's part of the contract now. When we all get back together, you are in charge. Is that how you're going to sell it to them?
Clearly not. I'm just not going to tell them.
Just going to take over quietly.
Dictatorship needs to be advertised, Nick.
Really?
Yeah,
Can't do it by
it
stealth.
can't exist subtly. John has texted in to say Johnny Rotten famously wore a T-shirt bearing the logo "I hate Pink Floyd." How did you feel when fashions changed and there was that reaction? How did you feel about punk?
I think probably a little put out by it, because we, I think, saw ourselves as being cutting edge and the new, extraordinary, exciting thing, and suddenly we were the establishment. And I think it had some effect on us, and had some effect on the music. It is worth mentioning that actual T-shirt is also in the exhibition and can be examined in detail.
Well, you are known for your self-deprecation, so there you go. There's a cloth manifestation of that. So then, what's fascinating from that though is my first, because of my age, my first knowledge of you and your band, Nick, really was Another Brick in the Wall. So becoming kind of on vogue again must have been hugely gratifying.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you have to remember that 50 years ago, it was unthinkable that rock and roll, any band, would survive for longer than 3 or 4 years. Even the Beatles. No one had any experience of it being a proper job. It was something you did for 2 or 3 years and then moved on. So to look back on it now and see that it was actually a full-time job for 50 years is extraordinary. And of course, when you do get younger audiences, it's enormously gratifying. It's a complete change from the idea that you've made music that your parents would hate into something where the parents quite often actually introduce their kids to the music.
Because you say that the wall was delivered to you and it was just complete. It felt that it was completely done, this concept behind it.
The concept was absolutely it's sort of preset by Roger, but inevitably the album itself, the music, was collaborative, but collaborative in a way with input from all sorts of people. I mean, Bob Ezrin as producer, James Guthrie as engineer. There were a lot of people who played a part in it.
So many people getting in touch. Just want to read you out a few texts. Nick, Mark in Thorpe Bay says, "Hi, can you please just say thank you with all the love in my heart for the many years of simply incredible music to the great Nick Mason, which has always been in my life. I went to the exhibition first day on Saturday. It was amazing. Finished with me sitting in a large room surrounded with screens with a bunch of strangers soaking up their last ever performance together of Comfortably Numb at Live 8 with tears in my eyes. I have always and will forever be a Pink Floyd fan." Bob in Shropshire, Pink Floyd, symphony, operetta, folk songs, all on modern, relatively speaking, instruments, wonderful musicality and a must-listen back catalogue for any serious student of British music. What is it, do you think, about the band that has brought new and successive generations on board with you?
Oh, I don't know. We should ask Mark and Bob, I think.
But everybody still is listening to Pink Floyd. There are still young people, 16, 17-year-old people listening to Pink Floyd. Why is that?
Okay, I think there are a number of elements contained. I think one has to start with the lyrics. I think some of Roger's lyrics were written by Roger when he was 23 years old, but they're as relevant to a 60-year-old if you take a song like Time. I think there's a sort of excellence in the recording itself, the technology, which is down to Abbey Road and Alan Parsons, who's the engineer on the album. And I think the link between the album sleeves and the music was also enormously important. We do still miss Storm Thorgerson, who died a few years ago. Was the most wonderful, irascible character. I think he is credited in the exhibition with this idea that he was described as a man who wouldn't take yes for an answer.
Well, that would certainly drive you creatively, wouldn't it? As well as driving you mad. How responsible was Storm, for people who don't know, for influencing the music? We know, of course, the visuals were completely... well, not completely, but certainly he was one of the driving forces behind the visuals. But what about the music? If the music represented the visuals or the visuals represented the music?
No, the Storm would actually come in really after the music. Even if it wasn't finished, it was nearly finished. And he would then try and work out how to interpret it. It wasn't us working to visuals, and it was much more him coming up with ideas that he felt represented the music.
Go on.
No, go on.
You were just talking earlier about young people, and we're talking about why they're still listening to Pink Floyd. A couple of days ago, you said you'd like to play with Harry Styles. Were you being totally serious? And is it going to happen?
I think it's unlikely to happen because he's got a perfectly good drummer as it is.
Yes, she is very good.
But I'm absolutely serious. There is no reason at all not to play with younger musicians who have different styles. I think that's perhaps something to make clear, that I have no sense of disapproval of anyone under 40 making music. I think there's some great musicians around, great writers, and I think the album that Harry's done recently is really good. And I think they operate in a far tougher environment than we ever did. I think to try and make a career in music now is really tough.
Why do you think it's tough? That's a really interesting point that you're making.
I think because I feel that the rungs of the ladder, some of the rungs are now missing, that the record companies that used to be able to take a punt on all sorts of acts, I mean, the release of singles 50 years ago was fantastic because it took, the cost was an afternoon in a recording studio and the vinyl, and after that, let's see what happens. Whereas now the investment is monstrous to get a band launched.
But for the first time in over a decade, Nick, and I was in at Island Records on Friday talking to them about this, was that streaming is now beginning to actually pay. So we could actually be getting into a situation post-Napster and post-illegal file sharing where you can actually make money from music and reinvest it in artist and repertoire.
Well, I think that may happen, and I think that would be great. And I think streaming is the future. And yes, if it connects enough people, and it could work. But for the last 10 years, it's been almost impossible for anyone to make any money out of recorded music. So for a young band, they have none of that income stream that would help them go out and tour.
So perhaps Pink Floyd, I know, unconscionable from many of the people listening to this programme, but Pink Floyd might not have made it had they been around in the current musical climate. Do
you know what? I think would have been off the X Factor before you could have said knife. It would have, yeah. I don't think would have had a hope in hell.
3 minutes 15 for a pop song might have been difficult, I can imagine. Mike has texted to say, Glastonbury 2018, go on asking, big year next year.
I'd love to, but I don't think the others are ready for it.
But it's never say never, isn't it?
Well, that's my attitude. I'm the eternal optimist or an idiot.
How on earth do you be the one that has to keep going ever so subtly every now and then?
It's in the nature of drummers. Drummers can't operate on their own. Sadly, the number of people who are interested in a 2.5-hour drum solo is very limited. You just have to get these novelty acts to come and work with you.
The drum sound check's hard enough work to listen to be honest, and I'm sure you've done lots of those in the time.
It's interesting, though, because you've spoken in the past about when David took over the duties of frontman, David Gilmour, how much he realised that was actually a really, really hard job to do.
Yeah, it's not that he realised it, but I think he probably
felt it more.
Probably felt it, certainly more than me. I think he felt that he really was carrying so much of it on his shoulders, particularly when we were out performing live.
And what else did you miss about Roger not being there at that time?
The arguments.
What did you argue most frequently about?
Oh, I don't know. I think we could argue about so many things, really. But it wasn't really arguments so much as I think Roger really wanted to go off and drive things his own way, really.
And there has right now a brilliant album out now, so he's certainly not been stopped being so prolific. But Live Aid, tell us about that. The last time that you guys got together to play together, how did it come about?
Well, it came about through Bob Geldof, of course, who decided that this would be a good idea, and Bob put a lot of energy into trying to persuade David initially to do it, and David was adamant he didn't. And Bob asked me what I thought, and I said I thought there was only one person who could persuade David to do it, and that was Roger. And so Bob basically went to Roger and said, would he give David a call and ask him to do it? And that was what tipped it. And I thought it was a terrific thing to do, I think, to play together for the right reasons and to do some good, rather than to do it for the 200 million tour or whatever, was terrific. And it was a good example to a lot of people, including my family.
We've had a text, actually, from Lee in Nottingham on this. Can you ask Nick?
Lee in Nottingham, what's he up to?
Well, you know what, he's chilling out, listening to Five Live.
Difficult question.
Me old pal Nick Mason's on. I'll give him a text, see how he is. He said, can you ask Nick about his emotions playing Comfortably Numb for the last time at Live 8? And the way he threw off his headphones for the finale was like, and then I can't repeat the word, forget this, I'll put it like that, I want to hear this.
Well, first of all, you never know whether it's the last time you're going to play something or not. That wasn't the case. I'm afraid to say there's a sort of technical thing here, which I will
The
explain.
monitors weren't working.
Not quite. But what we were doing for the keyboards, so there's quite a lot of programming going on. So what we do is we're working with a click track for the verses and choruses. But then for the final guitar solo, it's no longer necessary. You can just stay with the whatever tempo I care to give it.
Yes.
And it's a great thing just to lose the headsets for the last sort of guitar solo and drive it myself.
We were interviewing a band called the Kooks. I don't know if you're aware
I know
of
the
their
Kooks,
work.
Yeah, I've seen them play.
Oh, right. Well, Luke and Hugh were on, and I asked Hugh a question about the most extravagant thing they'd spent money on, and he said a pair of Gucci riding boots. Now, I know your extravagances go
Calfskin.
rather further than riding boots. So I kind of have to split your extravagances into sensible ones when you haven't been perhaps thinking in a rock and roll way and thinking quite sensibly about extravagance and, I deserve that, and ones that are perhaps not so sensible extravagances.
Well, it depends what you. Yeah,
Nice bit of
I think whatever
equivocation
you're
starting
talking about, we're
already.
basically heading down the road of the Ferrari showroom, aren't we?
Yeah, well, you've done lots of that.
Yes, indeed.
You like a fast car, don't you, Nick?
I do. Yes.
But they're sensible. I put those under sensible
Yeah, you
extravagances.
see, that's what's
Because they're technical, aren't they?
strange, really. Yeah, the idea that Ferraris are now seen as sensible shopping.
Well, if you've got the money, it's all relative, isn't it? And you're buying it presumably because you're very interested in the technicalities of it, right? Of how it works and how fast it goes. But the less sensible ones you regret.
Oh, regret? I don't know. There's that sort of pink tweed jacket I bought 25 years ago and have never actually plucked up the courage to wear.
You've
Does
still
that
got
count? I've still got it. I'm too mean to get rid of it.
Should have worn it to the opening of the exhibition.
I should have worn it today, actually. If
Oh,
I'd
you
known it was
should.
going to come up in conversation, I'd be wearing it now.
Pink tweed. I'm just
Yeah.
wondering about your thought
Boss.
process. Boss. How, yes.
Yeah. You want to know if I was doing drugs at the time, don't you?
If not, why not? I think is the question.
There's a great text here from Jerry who says, I own a humble classic car, so thumb through the odd car magazine. No end of rare, hugely expensive car adverts state ex-Nick Mason. Did he have this many, or are they stealing his name? P.S. The black Dino Ferrari is my favourite if it was his.
Well, I did have a Dino Ferrari, but
there
it
you
wasn't
go.
black.
Ah,
But it might have been repainted, so who knows? No, there's a few shameful things out there, but I've had some average cars as well as great cars.
Where
And
does
I
the-
still have some really average cars. I've got a Model T Ford that belonged to Coco the Clown. And the doors fall off, and the back collapses, and the radiator explodes. It's fabulous.
but it belonged to Coco the Clown.
Did the V&A refuse to have that in the middle of the...
I don't think it's suitable for a Pink Floyd thing, and it's perfect for going to a Leicester Square premiere, of course.
It's a bit cooler all the same than saying, I've got a white Vauxhall Nova from my cousin's Derek. You know, to be fair.
Oh, just hearing that, I think, I wonder if I can get hold of Derek and buy that car.
Just a question that I think Ruby Wax brought up, which is that when coming to write this book, how much of it did you genuinely remember, and how much of it had to be reminded on your behalf?
Well, I didn't have to be reminded. If I didn't remember it, I invented it. Obviously.
Hence the best novelist.
Exactly. No, I think actually the great thing is, particularly talking about the hardback, was the number of pictures. And there's nothing like a photograph that immediately brings back so many memories. And of course, I talked to anyone who was around at the time and could still be traced.
And just about the cars as well, I didn't realise until I started researching for this that you've actually raced and completed in 5 Le Mans 24-hour races. Is that right?
Yeah, that is.
Wow.
That was always my great sort of motor racing ambition. And the reason I ended up with these cars is I never wanted to be a car collector. I wanted to be a racing driver. But never quite fitted it in with everything else.
When was the last one you did?
Oh, the last time I went to Le Mans was mid-'80s, a long time ago now.
But you still compete?
Oh, yeah, I still compete, but now just with historics. Historic old cars, old driver.
What do you tell your grandchildren that you do for a living?
Unemployed, looking for work. That's why
Harry Styles, if you're listening.
Yeah. I was trying to get a job with Guy Ritchie on Aladdin and Harry to play drums. So far, neither of them got back to me.
So you haven't got an adequate description of what it is Grandad does at the moment.
I think Grandad's in the music industry.
Grandad to the music, that'll do. And then when they start to realise, well, of course, they're probably a bit older now, aren't they?
Yeah, one's already playing drums.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
How cool must it be to be a drummer and your granddad to be Nick Mason?
Well, it's a bit worrying for Nick Mason because I think he's already doing grades that I couldn't possibly achieve.
It is such a
technique.
pleasure to talk to you, Nick. Thank you very much
Thank
for chatting
you, Nick.
to us
No,
for
it's
such a
been
long
fun.
time this afternoon. It's really lovely.
Thank
The
you.
book is called Inside Out, A Personal History of Pink Floyd. And at the V&A, you can now go and see their mortal remains. A hell of an exhibition.